off the coast of Poland, deep beneath the icy waters of the Baltic, lie the torn remains of a German ocean liner. The vessel was to have been the salvation of thousands escaping the wrath of the advancing Soviet army. Her dash to freedom cut short by 3 Russian torpedoes. Join the Sea Hunters as they explore the site of the greatest single shipwreck tragedy in history, the wreck of the Nazi liner Wilhelm Gustoff. With over 100 million books in print, Clive Cussler is the Grand Master of shipwreck tales and adventure. Director of the Vancouver Maritime Museum, James Delgado is one of the world's foremost marine archaeologists. With over 20 years wreck diving experience, Mike Fletcher is an internationally renowned professional diver. Leading the Econova dive team, John Davis has coordinated shipwreck searches around the globe. Together, they explore the planet's last frontier in search of true adventures, the famous shipwrecks. They are the Sea Hunters.
Disaster at sea is a phrase that makes you think of great ocean liners, sinking with huge loss of life. Tragedies like Lusitania, Empress of Ireland, and of course Titanic. Ships whose death toll exceeded 1,000 lives. But imagine a wreck that sank with 5 times the number of victims as Titanic. Incredibly, such a tragedy actually occurred. It was in the Baltic Sea at the end of the Second World War, a ship crammed with over 10,000 men, women, and children, fleeing the advancing Russian army. 9,000 of these refugees would become the forgotten victims of the largest maritime disaster in the history of the world. I'm Clive Cussler. Now join the Sea Hunters team as they reveal this tragic story by diving the wreck of the Wilhelm Gustoff.
It was history's greatest single disaster at sea. A single ship struck down, carrying over 9,000 men, women, and children to an icy grave. Yet somehow, even with this appalling loss of life, this disaster remains little known. Perhaps it is because the sinking occurred at the end of the long war, when the world was weary of death. Perhaps because the victims were at the time the enemy, and this made it convenient to forget. But the Wilhelm Gustoff's tale of freedom won, then lost, must be told to keep alive the memory of the thousands who lost their lives that dark, cold January night. Sea Hunters Mike Fletcher, James Delgado, and Clive Cussler plot the position off the coast of Poland where the Wilhelm Gustoff has lain since the closing months of World War II.
And Kiel is where they were headed, isn't that correct, Jim?
Yeah.
She lies beneath 42 meters of water in the Baltic Sea, just off the coast of Poland. The team travels to the Gulf of Gdansk, where Wilhelm Gustoff's final voyage began. The Sea Hunters and researchers from the Polish Maritime Museum will sail to the wreck from the historic port of Gdansk. This port was the birthplace of the Polish democratic movement. In 1939, the city was the lightning rod that sparked the Second World War. Mike Fletcher and John Davis joined the staff from the Polish Maritime Museum aboard the venerable research vessel, the Gazubski Żeg.
The fact that the Sea Hunters are in Poland preparing to dive the Gustoff is the result of months of negotiation and goodwill. Diving Gustoff has its complications. It involves a tragic human war story where all parties suffered. The issues that existed at the end of the Second World War to some extent still resonate today. We have a German shipwreck sunk by a Soviet submarine that for years lay under the shadow of the Iron Curtain. You have to wonder that if the Soviet Union existed today, would we be here at all? But the real question is, what will we find at that wreck site?
The Sea Hunters will be the first group to explore the wreck with the aim of publishing the findings. As they leave Gdansk and head out to the dive site, They passed dockyards that boom with the sounds of industry and shipbuilding. The Wilhelm Gustoff began her career as a public relations tool for the Nazi regime. Named after a martyr, the assassinated leader of the Swiss Nazi Party, the Wilhelm Gustoff was built as a cruise ship for the German worker. The cruise ship career of the Willie G, as she was called, came to an end when the war was declared. In 1940, she was assigned to the newly captured Polish port of Gdynia to serve as barracks for German U-boat submariners. And so for 4 years, the Wilhelm Gustoff sat at anchor, a sheltered dormitory for hundreds of U-boat personnel. From this dock, she would take part in the largest sea evacuation operation in history. In 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of Russia by an army of approximately 3 million Germans.
The German advance was as rapid as it was ferocious. Russian partisan activity was met harshly. People were executed without trial. People were hung by the side of the road. Many innocent civilians died. It was a horrendous war with tens of millions of Russians dead. The war filled the Russians with a terrible resolve to fight back and to bring the war back home to Germany to make them pay for what they had done.
Russia's leader, Joseph Stalin, called upon his people to sacrifice their utmost in the defense of the nation. Germany had made a huge mistake by invading the Soviet Union. The Soviet winters and sheer ferocity of the resistance had been too much. In a complete turnabout, the hunter became the hunted. The Germans were beaten back and forced to retreat to East Prussia, where they found themselves flanked by forces closing them in. After the Soviets had crossed into German-held territory, they were determined to make the fascists pay with blood, terror, and tears. Rape, looting, and mass murder became the weapons of terror that forced the population to flee their beloved East Prussia, a land that had been their German ancestral home for hundreds of years. Panicked with nowhere to go, millions of refugees, mostly old men, women, and children, fled north to the Baltic. With the Soviets closing in, their most likely salvation would be to find ships that could carry them west over the Baltic and home to Mother Germany.
January the 26th, 1945, there was a knock on the door, and a Hitler youth, about 15, 16 years old, knocked on the door and gave us permission to flee. From the talk of the mothers, they always said, like, when are the Russians coming? What are we going to do? So mentally, somehow, even as a 10-year-old, one was prepared that it will happen sooner or later. So that moment came on the 26th when the Russian army had entered the city of Elbing, and we got permission to flee. So Mom, I think, had already her suitcase packed. All she did is walk to her girlfriend's apartment, and they discussed it, how they're going to flee. While she was doing that, I remember that my uncle had his trunks with the summer uniform stored in our bedroom, and right on top was a jackknife. And I just decided to steal it. And I stuck it into my ski pants. And I had it in my pants all the way on our flight.
So if I got this straight, in the winter of 1945, the survivors of, or the refugees, would have been coming from the east to the west, is that right?
Exactly, they just wanted to find a shortcut through the ice.
Oh, yeah.
Robert Dumzel is a marine archaeologist for the Polish Maritime Museum.
Let's say the refugees had to cross the Vistula Lagoon. They had about 12 kilometers just to get to the coast.
But by doing that, they would expose themselves to machine gun fire?
Unfortunately, yes, and we have to say that a lot of people, many people died on the way because the Russian pilots shot them. They bombed them as well, and even children and women didn't have a chance just to survive. But, well, they have no choice. They just have to escape, get to the mouth of the Vistula river, and hopefully get to the big ships in harbor of Gdynia. So it was just the only thing they could do.
After crossing the icy lagoon, thousands of refugees ran up against the beach in the Baltic Sea. From these beaches, they traveled along the Baltic on their way to the ports of Gdynia and Gdansk, hoping to find escape from the terror they had left behind. At nightfall, they moved up from the beaches into the forests, where they spent cold nights in shelters scratched out from the frozen earth by those who had passed before them.
Yeah. Well, I can't know, but you can just imagine this is the entrance. This is where you could have your fire.
Yeah,
Imagining this would be covered with branches.
they could use it as a shelter, exactly.
I could see women and children staying in these crude little shelters for the night.
Yeah, it was possible.
And they're everywhere. They're all the way along this coast as you head towards the west.
Aboard the Polish research vessel, John, Mike, and Robert examined side-scan images of the wreck. During the 1950s, the Polish government sponsored several dives on the Gustoff to determine if it should be raised.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, Poland found itself under the political control and dictates of Moscow. From the end of the war to the mid-1950s, the site was under the control of the Soviets. For approximately a decade, the Soviet Navy dove on the wreck, their activities wrapped in secrecy. It wasn't until the mid-1950s that Polish officials were allowed to inspect the wreck for the first time. And even then, that report was prepared in accordance with Soviet policy.
As you see here in the days of inspection, the name of the wreck was Weba 1. It was just a code name that even divers working there, they didn't know they are diving on Gustoff. And the report on the diving is marked Tajne, which means secret, and copy number 1. And here is a note that executed in 1 copy only.
It was rumored that the Gustoff sank transporting spoils of war. Items of value such as great works of art belonging to museums, to the personal property of citizens looted by the Nazis during their occupation of Poland and their march into the Soviet Union. One of the greatest art treasures from the Soviet Union that went missing during the war was the coveted Amber Room. An entire room of amber from the Catherine Palace, one of the summer residences of Russia's czars. It was stolen by the Nazis, and some believe they loaded it on board the Gustoff to be taken back to Germany. Now that the Poles were finally allowed to dive the Gustoff, the question was, what would they find? Would they find bodies? Would they find the much sought-after Amber Room? No one knew for sure.
When the Poles were finally permitted to dive the Gustoff, they sent only their best. Only a few divers out of the corps of over 100 were chosen. Professional diver Stefan Mamai was one of them. At the time, they worked in Mark V diving suits. The hard hat divers wore suits that weighed as much as 90 kilograms. This included a massive helmet and leaded boots. They breathed air pumped to the suit through hoses from a dive ship and endured hours in a decompression chamber located on the ship. They worked in constant shifts. As one diver emerged from the depth, another would be on his way down to the wreck.
The question where is or where was the amber chamber was coming back and back. And when we discussed the results of inspection of Wilhelm Gustoff, It was generally assumed by the old divers that probably Russians were there before us, and they were looking for amber chamber, and the wreck was penetrated and was stripped out of the valuables before they just let the Polish administration to make inspection.
He saw the German suits hanging.
Really?
Inside, in the
Inside?
cabins. Inside in the cabins.
Like officer suits, you mean?
Jest.
Really?
Jest top deck, jest w tych dużych bulajach, nie?
On the top
Wybitych
deck
można
were-
było widzieć.
Okay, where would you suggest is the best places to dive on the Gustoff, where you're going to see the most? Because
This bridge aft.
yeah, the stern, that's the best area.
Bridge aft. Jest cut bridge,
Yeah.
ona jest tam zaspawana. Tak.
After an 8-hour steam, the team finally reaches the dive site.
The Polish Maritime Museum's vessel was perfect for the mission. It was big, it could carry all of the equipment we needed to be totally independent out there in the exposed part of the Baltic Sea. It was our home for a week, and it was a 24-hour mission. Whether it was day or night, if the weather was right, we would dive. The first night, the seas calmed. We had everything we needed in place, our mixed gas, all the emergency procedures, it was all there. The conditions were right, we decided to go.
All right.
The first dive on any shipwreck is always problematic, but the Gustoff was especially so because here we had a huge ocean liner in relatively deep water. It was totally dark down there. Our first dive, we landed not on the wreck, but off somewhere on the bottom. It took us many minutes just to find the wreck. And although I was prepared to find a wreck that didn't really resemble Gustoff, I wasn't prepared for what I found. It was a mass of twisted and broken steel, nothing that resembled a ship. It took us several minutes just to orient ourselves, to know where we were, to try and get a sense of what was the stern, what was the bow. But there was enough structure, even amongst that mass of metal, that I finally realized I was on the bow. Now I knew which way to go to dive on the stern, the area that Stefan had suggested would make the most interesting dive. And as we moved aft, we found more and more of the same, twisted and broken metal, evidence of a force way beyond nature. We saw evidence of cutting torches. We saw evidence of explosions that had burst outward from the hull. Something almost inexplicable had caused all this carnage.
Early morning. The port of Gdynia is quiet and the docks are empty. In January 1945, these same docks were jammed with tens of thousands of desperate refugees fleeing from the Russian advance. Men, women, and children, freezing in the bitter cold, waited to be assigned tickets for passage to the sea and safety. Waiting in line with his mother, listed as passenger 2506, was 10-year-old Horst Voigt.
After the registration, we were assigned meal cards. We were assigned the space where we can put our suitcase down and where you can sleep. My mom got permission to move to almost the top floor of the ship, which, as it will turn out later, was our life savings.
Finally, just past noon on January 30th, the Wilhelm Gustoff was prepared for launch. Her every nook and corner was filled with men, women, and children. At this point, it is believed that well over 6,000 people were on board a ship built for a maximum of 1,865. As the liner made its way out of the harbor, she was forced to halt by a number of small boats, all laden with yet more refugees, begging to be taken aboard. Many were women and children.
I saw Wilhelm Gustoff coming from the harbor and bypassing my ship, my boat. And you could see that during the ride of Wilhelm Gustoff, they still took over refugees. You could really see that, yeah. Permanently, people were climbing Wilhelm Gustoff.
No one will ever know just how many more came aboard. However, at one point, it is estimated that she had taken on another 2,000. By the time the ship had reached the open sea, it is now believed she was carrying over 10,000 men, women, and children.
I remember when the ship started moving the third day on the 30th, because I was outside. I watched it. Once you got out of the harbor, past the light tower, you had the feeling that you were on the way of safety now.
Once at sea, the rough waters caused a wave of seasickness among the passengers huddled in the hot, stuffy cabins and companionways. The temperature outside had dropped to a bone-chilling 17 degrees below 0 Celsius. But even with the miserable conditions on board, there was comfort in the thought that soon they would all be in the relative safety of the West, far from the approaching Russians. But the Russians were closer than they knew. Lurking nearby was the Soviet submarine S-13 under the command of Captain Third Class Sasha Marinesko. Marinesko, who had spent his youth as a harbor ruffian in the Russian port city of Odessa, was a brilliant submarine commander whose flamboyant behavior had earned him the wrath of his superiors. His presence near the Gulf of Gdansk was contrary to his orders, and he was convinced that this is where he would find targets for his torpedoes.
The night the Gustoff went to sea, her captain made the decision to run out into deep water. According to standard wartime practice, he would now have to follow a zigzag pattern to evade submarines. But this he did not do. Another choice he made was to run with his navigation lights on. These decisions had fatal consequences.
On this same night of January 30th, the S-13 had surfaced nearby to charge her batteries when her lookout spotted the Gustoff's lights. As Marinesko watched the giant ship sail into the darkness, he felt confident that the waves would hide him from the enemy and elected to attack the liner on the surface. After 2 hours spent overtaking the liner, the S-13 maneuvered herself into firing position between the liner and the shore. As the huge vessel crept into the night sight's crosshairs, Marinesko gave the order to fire. 3 torpedoes leapt from the submarine and streamed toward the Gustoff. In the next few minutes, the Wilhelm Gustoff was transformed into hell on earth. The first torpedo struck the Gustoff's forecastle near the crew's quarters. Many crew members died in the blast. Many more were sealed inside the hull when watertight bulkheads slammed tight to contain the seawater pouring in through the gash.
I remember Mom shaking me, and at that moment I heard a crash, like a detonation of some sort. Being 10, I did not know what that was. Then I heard another one. Now, I found out that at that particular moment, 3 torpedoes were shot. I assumed I slept through the first one, and I heard the second and the third.
The second torpedo exploded just under the swimming pool where the women's naval auxiliary members were placed for the voyage. Nearly all 300 women were blown to pieces. Torpedo number 3 struck amidships, flooding the engine room and destroying the engines. Panic swept the ship. The confusion and noise of the explosions and rushing of freezing seawater and the screams of the wounded created bedlam below decks. Suddenly, the corridors and stairways were jammed with a mob of frantic people, all with just one thought: to get out. Captain Robert Herring, in command of his vessel T-36, was escorting the German warship Admiral Hipper a short distance away.
There have been signals, by Gustoff, This wasn't my job to think about these because I had to protect Hipper, But then, of course, I think Hipper got some closer news. I don't know what they get. And then Hipper said, sail to, this is Gustoff, sail to Gustoff, you are released. I accelerated my boat to meet Wilhelm Gustoff.
Like a single giant organism, the crowd surged upwards. Children were crushed, and many trampled to death. Soon the decks were covered with bodies, and still the crowd surged on.
We made it out of the cabin to a gangway where stairs were. We were lucky in the regard that we were on the top of the ship, the top deck. We were lucky that we were on the port side, because as soon as the 3 torpedoes hit the ship turned. And since each side had 11 lifeboats, we were on the lucky side, because the other side, none of the boats could get loose.
I drove to Wilhelm Gustoff, and I saw Wilhelm Gustoff slightly, 15 degrees or so, I would estimate, But enough that you could not go on either side of Wilhelm Gustoff. Would ruin your ship, or you couldn't save anybody, So you can save, and so it ruins your ship when something is happening. This was for sure, because I sailed around, close around Gustoff, and was thinking what to do.
You had to walk downstairs to get to the rescue boat, okay? Then Mom and her girlfriend and Dad and I, we were choosing to get onto the boat. So they lifted us into the lifeboat, and eventually, after it was filled, they lowered us. The boat is full, about 50, 60 people in the boat. And all of a sudden, they started to scream, "The ropes are frozen to the boat. Who's got a knife?" Remember what I mentioned to you earlier when I fled Elbe? That knife I stole from my uncle. I had it in my pants. I gave it to a man. Eventually, they cut the ropes, which were, quite thick, obviously. And that's why I'm alive today.
Desperate swimmers threatened to swamp the lifeboats, which remained afloat.
Then the excitement of going away from the boat, because you're only about 10, 15 feet away from that big wall of boat. And you hit the rougher part of the sea, people jumping down, people trying to grab your rescue boat, trying to pull themselves onto it, getting hammered on the hands. Awful, awful. But I remember.
Those whose life jackets kept them afloat, and those lucky enough to be in the life rafts or boats, watched the final moments of Wilhelm Gustoff in horror.
All of a sudden, they started to scream, "Look at the Gustoff. It's all lit up." For some reason, which nobody can explain to this day, the whole ship was lit up. And in minutes it went down, it was gone.
It had been less than 2 hours since the first torpedo had struck. The next day, the team will make a second dive. Now that they know the orientation of the wreck, they have positioned themselves to dive the stern. When the Wilhelm Gustoff went down, she came to rest in approximately 42 meters of water.
Descending on Gustoff in daylight was a totally different experience. And yet as we descended deeper and deeper and we lost all natural light, you're immediately taken back to that first dive. And all those psychological and emotional feelings that you had returned. I found myself now on the stern, a part of the ship that I completely recognized. The stern was really quite well preserved. It was what I had expected, and it's what you would expect from a wreck in the Baltic Sea. We were seeing a part of the ship that was very much like it was that night that it sank. Suspended in the water, we were looking up at the unmistakable brass letters that spelled out Wilhelm Gustoff. I was looking up at that same name as if I was one of those passengers who saw that name and stood on the dock thinking that this would be their salvation. This would be their last chance out of Poland and back to their homeland of Germany. And then we ascended that deck, tipped hard to port, climbed towards the starboard side, over the starboard rail, and down over that aft section. And everywhere there was evidence of the fishing industry, the snarled nets, trawl nets and gill nets hanging everywhere. And all the while we were caught up in this sense of eeriness. You could only see what your lights would illuminate. It really was a frightening place. But everywhere now we could see the evidence of a live, vibrant ship. It really was quite well preserved. The teak of the deck, the wooden cap of the handrail. This is what we had expected to find. You really got a sense of the people who walked this deck, the people whose hand touched the same handrail, the people who descended on the same set of stairs.
Before the ship sank, thousands of people would have attempted to reach the upper decks. Some of these people found rescue. Those still alive were now plunged into darkness. The cold was indescribable. One by one, those in the water surrendered to the numbness and slipped away. Their lifeless bodies kept afloat in their life jackets. Others begged to be rescued by a passing lifeboat or raft, swimming towards them with frozen hands and feet.
After 20 minutes at the most, all of a sudden, they say there's a big ship coming. Maybe they can rescue.
The surface of the water was covered by heads. Alive, dead, I don't know. Covered by heads. One head beside the other. The saving of the people is very, very difficult. This is first to overcome the height from the water surface to the boat. Also on my so-called small boat, 2 meters or something, yeah, to do that when frost is and so.
An amazing way you get rescued. When the ship stands still, it doesn't go forward and backwards, it goes sideways and sideways. And that's the ship. It comes down, they grab you and they pull you up. And again, the law, kids first. So I was one of the first or second child that was pulled up.
No, I was on the bridge, observing this, and of course being aware, it's not only that we have to save the people, we also have to clear the submarine. Who did that? The safety of my ship. I had somebody listening in my boat, down deep in my boat, with a hearing device, yeah, and he said, I have the submarine, yeah. It is that degree, yeah. And all I did was, first I had to decide whether to do something with the submarine or continue to save. And I decided to continue to save, yeah. So all I did was following this information I got permanently to put the bow of one ship into the direction of the submarine. That's all I did, yeah. And I was permanently busy with that operation, and in the meantime, the people was taken on board. And they have been everywhere on board, yeah, everywhere. In the machine room, the boiler rooms, everybody. All these rooms, yeah, were full of refugees, yeah.
They took me down into the engine room. They dried me off and gave me a blanket, and it was so warm in there. Oh, I can't remember. It was so warm, it was so comfortable. And one of the shipmates looked after me and asked me, is there anything you would like, son? And I said to him, yeah, I'm hungry. Can I have a marmalade and sandwich? And he managed to get that. And, I ate it with great pleasure. I remember that because I met this gentleman 50 years later, and he described to me how he saw me as a 10-year-old eating the sandwich. He said, I was so pleased with it. However, after I ate half of it, he said, I started to cry. Where's my mom?
As we descended that staircase, we moved from the upper deck down one deck level, and it still was that same vibrant ship. And of course, I wanted to see the evidence of the passengers and the people on board. As I descended deeper into the ship, as I went from one deck level to another, I saw the fixtures and the fittings of the ship, the evidence of the washrooms and the cabins. I looked for those German officer uniforms that Stefan had told me about. None of that existed. As I ascended deeper, it became not unlike the center of the ship, twisted and broken. And then eventually we hit bottom. We were as far and as deeply penetrated into the ship as we could go. And when I hit bottom, I felt very uncomfortable. Not only was it a physically demanding dive, but it was demanding psychologically and emotionally. It wasn't unlike being in a graveyard at night. And although I felt this great sense of responsibility to be respectful, I really was uncomfortable there. If we were going to find evidence of the dead, this is where it would be. This is where perhaps thousands of people have been trapped and taken to the bottom with Gustoff. And I dove on many shipwrecks in the past and seen evidence of the dead. This was the Baltic. If a body of water would preserve evidence of those people, it would be here. And yet, there was no evidence of the dead. In fact, there was no evidence of passengers. There was none of their possessions. All the thousands of things you associate with those thousands of passengers were gone. There was nothing. You're left with this question of where could it have gone? Certainly, it couldn't have drifted out of the ship. For some reason, the Gustoff had been stripped of everything associated with humanity.
It was a common understanding that the wreck of Wilhelm Gustoff was thoroughly searched by the Soviet Navy between 1945 and 1956, when the first Polish inspection was carried on.
During the 10 years which followed the war, the Russians were said to have accessed many wrecks in the Baltic. Many of these wrecks could have been laden with human corpses.
Some wrecks which were loaded with thousands of refugees and sunk during rising or removal, the wire baskets were collected to the outlets of pump. Because the remains of human beings and with all the belongings and pieces of clothing and all the dirt and garbage in the ship's hold, especially one vessel sunk in Świnoujście port, which was raised by the divers I met, and I talked to them, and it was experience they were talking about still 50 years later.
Nobody knows the exact number of people carried to their deaths within the Gustoff. A few, a very lucky few, found rescue. But still, they were not out of danger.
So there came a minute where my first officer said, "Captain, it is not possible to take over more people." Yeah? No, still fighting with myself what to do. There was something we observed on the bridge, that 2 torpedoes came to us in the water. 2 torpedoes. Left on the starboard side, one a bit more back, and the other direction to the boat. Torpedoes. And the only possibility I had at that time to give the command, hard starboard, yeah, maximum speed ahead, which I did. And if you do this with a boat like me, something happens, of course. Yeah. It was, of course, terrible for the refugees, which were nearly close to be taken on board and so, but what can you do? It's terrible.
Loaded with survivors, the T-36 left the disaster scene at high speed. 564 confused and frightened survivors found refuge on the boat.
Now, Mom, in the meantime, after the children were got pulled up and started asking, like, where's my son? And of course, nobody knew. I was sitting down in the engine room. So she got a hold of a Marine, and he said, well, how old is he? She said, he's 10. She says, well, there are some kids up on the front of the ship. Let's go and take a look. But they were dead. They lifted the tarp up. Mom looked at them. That's not my son. So she looked and looked until she found me. which took obviously quite some time, because after I had my marmalade sandwich, they put me in the third bunk behind a man, and nobody could see me. Okay, and I was hidden. So it took Mom almost all night to find me, but she eventually did.
By the next day, the survivors of the Wilhelm Gustoff sinking were safely landed in the German port of Sassnitz. They shook the hand of Captain Robert Herring in farewell. Many would never see him again.
Because of that action, yes, I was decorated. Danke. Ehrentafelspange. This is the name of it. This medal has got 50 people only. Yeah. When I die, in the paper, yeah, whether I want to have Träger der Ehrentafelspange der Kriegsmarine. Porter, owner of the Ehrentafelspange der Kriegsmarine.
The sea is our greatest battlefield. It's also our greatest graveyard. The wreck of the Wilhelm Gustoff was the worst recorded maritime disaster, overshadowing the better-known sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The loss of the Wilhelm Gustoff in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, in many ways characterized the brutal, vicious nature of that global conflict. Commemorating the disaster by laying a wreath in memory of the dead, particularly for the women and the children who died, is a reminder of how much times have changed. It's a reminder of how a ship like this, sitting on the bottom of the ocean, can be not just a frozen moment of time, but a reminder of the way things were, and hopefully, of lessons to be learned. Sitting in the depths of the Baltic, the rusting bones of the Wilhelm Gustoff are a potent reminder of the ultimate cost of war.
This is Clive Cussler. Now it's your turn to go into the mountains, go into the deserts, go under the lakes, the rivers, and the seas, and search for history. You'll never find a more rewarding adventure.
Join us again as we search the oceans of the world for lost and famous shipwrecks. Another true adventure with the Sea Hunters.